In this video, I want to take a look at the new Slicex plugin. Slicex is a beat slicing tool that gives us a ton of options for editing and modulating our loops and can be looked at as the big brother to the Fruity Slicer plugin from previous versions. To put it simply, a beat slicer is a program that takes a beat, or a loop, analyzes it, and then converts the one sound file into smaller sound files, or slices, so that you can manipulate the individual pieces. Now, when you import a loop into the Slicex, it doesn't actually create any new files, but moreover, it slices the beat and stores the pieces into internal memory so that you can use them individually. We'll take a look at the functions and features of the Slicex in this video so that you can get the most out of this awesome new addition to FL Studio. To start off with, I want to go through the different parts of the plugin so that we can get familiar with the workspace, and then we'll take a look at usage. At the top, we have the master panel. This contains our master controls for volume, randomness, LFO, and pitch. Again, these are master levels and will affect the final output. We'll look closer at the randomness control as we move along. We also have X and Y controls and a modulation pad, which can be controlled by left-clicking and dragging, or by right-clicking to go directly to that spot. We also have an option for smooth, which will smooth out any movements. We also have our layering options, which we'll cover when we get to using the plugin. Layering will be one of the ways in which we can use the Slicex to create new and unique sliced loops. There's also a menu of macros, which again covers some options we'll discuss shortly, as well as options for some settings. The sample start covers whole length option is for letting each slice cover the entire region. What this means is that the sample start modulation located in the articulator settings will be covered in the entire region, not just the attack portion, which is 100 milliseconds. We'll discuss this more as we get to the articulator section. Link velocity to volume allows you to play the samples with velocity like a normal keyboard. With this option off, velocity will not affect the slices on playback. Loop half of region will loop the second half of the region if you are choosing to do so when you are looping. High-quality envelopes will give greater accuracy in your envelopes, and lock data will prevent any audio edits from taking place. With auto dump selected, Deck A will automatically be dumped to the piano roll when editing is complete. You will always have to dump Deck B manually, which we'll cover shortly. Finally, with KB input selected, the typing keyboard function is disabled to allow you to use keyboard shortcuts. Lastly, we have our display modes. The Show Keyboard panel will show or hide the keyboard panel at the bottom of the screen. Since Slicex is a rather large interface, hiding this feature can give you some much needed space. Then, Full Mode shows all of our panels. No Audio Editor hides the audio editor portion. No Region Settings hides the region and articulator section, and Compact displays only our master panel. You can always hide and display panels as needed. Next, we have our articulator section. As discussed in the envelope controller tutorial, you can think of articulators as slots. We have 8 articulators, or slots, in the Slicex, so this means that you can have 8 different setups and then route the slices to them however you want. Each articulator contains some filter options, as well as some envelopes for controlling volume, panning, cutoff, resonance, speed, and start. These envelopes function just like any other envelopes in FL Studio. You must activate them by pressing the On button, and then you can draw out new points by right-clicking. The Speed envelope determines playback speed, and the Start envelope is basically a pre-delay kind of setting. The default is 100 milliseconds, but if you select the Sample Start Covers Whole Length option we discussed, you can use this envelope to change the delay setting before the sample begins playback. Over to the left, we also have options for assigning different slices to different articulators. Again, the way Slicex works is by slicing up loops and assigning the individual hits to slices, represented by markers. Each marker can then be assigned to an articulator where you can apply changes like we just discussed. We have 2 decks, A and B. Each deck can have a separate loop in it, and we'll see in a bit how to play both decks in different ways. But know for now that you can choose the different markers or slices from a deck and assign them to different articulators or slots. Then, you can control the amount of the articulator setting with the knob on the right. You can also pan and raise volume as well as change the filter, speed, and start settings for each slice. We also have options for output to the mixer for each slice and the cut by group option we discussed in the sampler video. The Wave Editor panel shows us our slices as well as the waveform image of each. Here we can choose between deck A and B by left-clicking the A and B display to highlight the deck we want. We can also preview the deck by using the transport controls. When you drag a loop into a deck, it will be automatically sliced based on FL Studio's advanced slicing algorithm, or if the loop already has slice markers, they will be imported and displayed. You can preview a slice by right-clicking it. You can make a selection by left-clicking and dragging to highlight the area you want to select. The information about the loop will be displayed below the transport controls. You can change the sample rate, bit rate, and stereo mono control by left-clicking on each, or right-clicking on the sample rate info. Beside the deck selector, you'll see the name of the loop as well. Now, we have some menu items above the waveform that give us further options. First, we can load and save samples, as well as export region data and export a PNG image of the currently selected sample. Beside that, we have another option to edit properties. Next to this, we have options to cut and copy as well as paste. This is also where you can find undo options if any exist. We have different paste options which will allow us to mix sounds or stretch them to the place where they are being pasted, as well as an option to mix the spectral properties of the copied sample with the sample it's being pasted to. At the bottom, we have options for clear, trim, delete, and insert silence. I would leave click-free editing on, as it will help to avoid clicks and pops at edit points. We discussed this a bit in the direct wave tutorial while discussing amplitude. Next, we have some tools to affect our slices. The envelope options discussed next will be some envelopes we'll get to at the bottom of the waveform panel. Cancel all envelopes will do just that. Add points at selection will add a point at the beginning, middle, and end of a slice for the current envelope. Add points at regions will add a point at the beginning and the end of the current region for the envelope, and flip vertically will invert the envelope points. We also have some edit options for the sound including amp, reverse polarity, normalize, fade in and out, and declick in and out. The fade in and out will use a logarithmic curve to fade from 0 to 100% or vice versa, and will affect the currently selected region if any, or the entire sample if no region is selected. The declick in and out will make a similar move, but on a smaller scale to remove a pop or a click when looping. Center removes DC offset, as well as we can reverse, time stretch, and apply a scratch effect based on the all-purpose envelope, which is located at the bottom of the waveform in the left-hand corner. Below this are some options for switching channels and converting channels, as well as a white noise generator and a place to run scripts. These scripts are usually effects, but if you know programming from Pascal, you may be able to write your own and run them. This is an advanced feature and will not be discussed here, but you can read through the documentation in the help file. Acquire noise threshold will detect the peak of the currently selected region. You need to do this in order to use the next options. Gate noise will gate anything below the noise threshold. Trim side noise will delete areas below the threshold. Trim all noise and slice up will trim the noise and reslice the remaining data. We also have spectral effects like convolution reverb, blur, and equalize. Next, we have some regions options such as normalize all regions and declick in and out all regions. Perfect all regions declicks in and out automatically for all regions. We also have the option to dump score to piano roll, which we use to actually dump the loop to the piano roll. Now, the great thing about Slicex is that it will automatically adjust the note length when dumping to the right size to match the actual loop. Of course, you can go into the piano roll and draw out the notes yourself or edit what's there, but this is a great starting point as the loop will be exact and play back exactly how it's supposed to be. You'll also notice you're given different options when dumping, such as backwards and stutter. These are pre-computed scores which will give us some really interesting and cool effects, so be sure to play around with the different options. The randomize level comes into play here as well, because when you select the random preset, the randomness level in the master panel will determine the randomization amount. Lastly, you can tune the loop by selecting Tune Loop. This will open a window with options for changing pitch parameters. The Convert to Score and Dump to Piano Roll is another really neat option that you can use on non-percussive samples to automatically find the notes of a sample and then have them dumped to the piano roll. Now, this works best for clean, single instrument samples. The more noise or instruments playing in a sample, the less accurate the conversion from audio to MIDI will be. Finally, you can send the sample to the channel window as an audio clip, which will be automatically created and inserted for you. You also have the option to add regions and markers, set loop points, and tell the program the first downbeat. You also have options for delete and rename, and the option to assign the current selected region to different notes or to assign all to different notes. You have different mapping options here, and you can use what works best for you, but we'll also look at another way to assign keys in a moment. At the bottom of this menu, we have our Auto Slice option, which covers sharp, medium, and dull. These three options will give us many to few slice regions respectively. The grid slicing options are based on the small, medium, and large grid lines. Detect pitch regions will slice based on detected pitch variations. This is more for non-percussive samples. Zero cross-check all samples will remove clicks that may occur again as a result of the waveform not matching at different amplitude levels. Finally, freeze all prevents region editing. Next to all this, we have some view options and display settings which you can adjust to your liking. As well, you can hide or show the regions and loop points. Here, you can also adjust the time format as well as move the scroll bar from the top to the bottom and hide the background gradient effect. The magnet icon gives us some snapping options. Again, you can use what works best for you and change to different options if need be throughout your editing. Beside this, we have some selection options. And finally, we have some zoom options. Beside all of this, we have some shortcuts for things we've already discussed, so I won't go through them again, but just to give you a rundown from right to left, we have undo, normalize, fade in and out, run script, time stretch, add a marker, change the slicing method, dump score to piano roll, save, and drag selection to new channel. The drag selection option is a cool feature because it allows you to drag the selected audio directly from the icon to the channel window, and a new instance of a sampler will be created with your audio in it. So if you ever needed to copy something from Slicex and save it, this would be one way to do it. Now below these shortcuts we have options for scrubbing through the loop or region. You can also left-click the jog wheel icon and scroll left or right to scrub through the audio. We can also display just Deck A by selecting Show Single Deck. You can also change the display from waveform to spectrum. We turn the click-free editing option on and off with this next control. And finally, we can enable and disable auto-scrolling, which would only affect you if you were zoomed in enough to show a scroll bar. The last thing to note in this section is the waveform area itself and the envelopes within it. Below the waveform image, we have an arrow icon that opens a menu with a lot of tools we just discussed, as well as some icons that we can use to create different envelopes. The first is the Edit Waveform icon, which is the default setting and allows us to view the waveform and make edits we've already discussed. Next, we have a panning envelope, which we can use to pan the sample left and right. Another envelope is the volume envelope, and then a stereo separation envelope. Finally, we have the all-purpose envelope. The all-purpose envelope is the one that determines the scratch effect we discussed earlier. Now, when using these envelopes, you won't hear the changes made to the data dumped to the piano roll. The way to hear it is to preview the sample in Slicex. Then, once you're happy with your changes, go to Tools and then Mix Down Amp Envelope. This will change the waveform data to reflect your edits, and then you can dump to piano roll to have the changes affect the output. The last thing to mention about Slicex is the keyboard panel. The keyboard panel contains steps that represent notes. You can change the octaves using the list on the left. To assign a particular region to a key, select the region by right-clicking it and then right-click on the note you want to assign it to. Choose Assign Current Region to this key, and the note name will appear in the region to show you that it is mapped to that note. If a note is already assigned to a region, you can choose Select Region Assigned to this key. Now, this is where layering comes in. If you have both decks loaded with different loops, you can choose to layer the samples together. To do so, left-click the down arrow icon in the master panel and choose Layer Both Decks from the macros. This will auto-assign the slices to the same keys consecutively, and when you dump to piano roll, you will have both loops play. You have other options, such as assign to black and white keys, in which deck 1 is on the white keys and deck 2 is on the black, or assign to whole keyboard, in which deck 1 goes first and then deck 2 comes after it, again consecutively on the keyboard. We also have options here to assign deck 1 to articulator 1 and deck 2 to articulator 2. This may save you time if you plan to use just 2 articulators. The last thing to mention is that regarding MIDI and channels, deck 1 will be on even numbers and deck 2 will be on odd numbers. This means that you can lay out deck 1's loop on a pattern, then go to another pattern, select deck 2 and dump to piano roll, then go into the piano roll, cut the notes, go back to the pattern with deck 1 on it and paste. Now you can have both decks laid out in front of you with all the notes ready to manipulate. This works because of the colors of the notes. As discussed earlier, the odd number channels are deck 1, so if we choose channel 1, which is a deep green color, the notes will sound according to deck 1. But if we choose channel 2, which is a lighter green, the notes will be deck 2. This is just another way to lay out your notes according to deck without having to layer anything. And a quick note again on layering, which we saw in the master panel. The different types of layering we have are all, which plays all of the slices assigned to that note, all gain compensated, which equals out the volume so that no one slice is louder than the other, velocity mapped, which bases the volume of slices on the same note on the crossfade options below the layering drop-down menu, modulation X and Y, which will allow you to make crossfades using the X and Y controls. Again, this is based on the crossfade setting. Then random, which will randomly select between slices when the crossfade is set to none. Cycle, which alternates between slices, and time sync, which selects the slices closest to the tempo of the song. The same deck switch, when on, will only accept MIDI data from one deck at a time, meaning if you play on an even MIDI channel, deck 2 plays, and an odd MIDI channel will play deck 1. With this option off, both decks will play when assigned to the same note. So we've seen in this video how the Slicex is an extremely powerful tool for creating new and unique grooves from existing loops, and how we can have tighter control over our audio with these simple tools. You can always rewatch this video or turn to the help file by pressing F1 in FL Studio if you need to review any of this information. Slicex is sure to be an asset to FL Studio for many years to come, and I encourage you to take some time to get familiar with this awesome new addition. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.